We do believe this to be an isolated event. Senator Richard Shelby is ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, and he joins me now. You will be helping lead the questioning today. Is that mea culpa from what you saw in the testimony that he's already provided ahead of the hearing going to be enough?
Oh, no. I think what we need to do first is let Mr. Dimon, along with the regulators, if they ever get their stuff together, explain what went on so we can decide, was this gambling or was this managing the risk? Or was this, did the management of J.P. Morgan really know what was going on, or were they in the dark? We don't know that.
Now, you were one of the only, if the only, Republicans to vote against Glass-Steagall. How does this change your view, if it does at all, what's happened at J.P. Morgan around what should happen with Dodd-Frank and what should happen with the Volcker Rule now?
Well, first of all, the Volcker Rule is hard to define. The regulators have not defined it. They have never implemented it. Dr. Volcker said before, when he testified before the Banking Committee, that he knew what it meant when he saw it, but he couldn't define it, whatever it is. Well, the regulators hadn't defined it yet. So the Volcker Rule's not in place yet. I believe that if you look at all the bank failures, most of them have failed because of lack of capital. We've closed about 500 banks. I don't know of one yet that has failed because they've been trading. Trading is risky, but, you know, making loans are risky, too.
Does this loss deserve a hearing? I mean, you know, people talk about the Washington theater of what these hearings can sometimes turn into. This is not a loss that has impacted taxpayers.
That's right.
This is a private business. How do you think about that particular issue?
Well, I believe it warrants a hearing because no one knows what's really happened, and it's been in the news so much. You're absolutely right. It did not threaten the capital structure. All the regulators asked the question last week. They said that they could have lost basically $80 billion and still be standing. That's strong, and that's good. My interest is making sure that the taxpayers don't pick up the tab. In other words, that we don't bail out people.
Not in this particular instance, but in the larger context.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Joe Kernan's got a question for you, Senator.
Yeah, Senator. A lot of viewers are pointing out, and I'm not, focusing this on you or your party or anyone in particular, but they're pointing out that the federal deficit is running at $2.3 billion per day for the fourth consecutive year. Congress is not entitled to hold hearings on other shortfalls. Maybe this will humble Congress to act. I mean, it's nice that you're so concerned with J.P. Morgan. Should there be hearings on what is happening at Congress and the deficit for the country, too? Who would preside over them?
You put things in perspective. The number one issue facing this country is the debt and the growing debt of this country, by far. You're absolutely right. The hearing on J.P. Morgan and their loss pales in comparison to that. But since J.P. Morgan has been in the news so much, I think maybe we can put some things to rest. If we can find out what happened, maybe this isn't a news thing. But a lot of people think it is. We'll see today.
Right. Senator, one of the questions I'm curious about is, Jamie Dimon may not be able to answer some of the questions that are going to be asked, or he's going to try to deflect some of them around the size of the trade, what the trade exactly looks like, in part because he's trying to get out of that trade, and the costs incurred if he actually explains it to the public might increase. How are you and your colleagues going to respond when he says, look, I just can't answer that?
Well, if he says he can't answer it, in other words, he doesn't have the knowledge base of it, that's something.
Well, I think he is going to have a knowledge base, and he's just not going to be prepared to answer it.
If he says he can't answer it because it's proprietary, everything like this, maybe we could go into a closed hearing. We'll have to wait and see.
Is that something that you think could happen?
Absolutely.
What do you want to know about the regulators? Meaning, one of the big questions is, should the regulators have been able to spot the risk in this trade? How important is that to you?
Very important. We had the regulators last week. They couldn't really answer the question, said they were doing the study, trying to look back and
but the larger question, do we think that regulators should be able to spot risk like this, but in essence, micromanage all of the risks in these institutions? A bank like J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Citi, they're making loans every day, big loans.
Absolutely not. They cannot manage all risk. They should look at the overall structure, how banks are run, and make sure that they don't visit the taxpayer. In other words, that's my thing, that they've got adequate capital. There's going to be risk in making loans or dealing with derivatives, always.
Right. If there's one question you are desperate to get from him, it is what?
Well, I'm not desperate to get anything. I would be interested in seeing what really happened.
Right.
You know.
How political is it going to get? I noticed some of the comments coming out of the other party last night in reference to some of the testimony that Mr. Dimon's going to be giving. He was much more critical. How do you think? Do you think it's going to divide along party lines today?
I hope not. I think that what we need to do is not be jumping on J.P. Morgan, but finding out what happened, because this goes on every day. People make risk, take risk. Sometimes they get rewards for it, sometimes they don't. But that's the nature of the markets, that's the nature of banking.
If somebody is to blame, is there something that you think will come out of this? I mean, something substantial. Will we see Volcker change out of this? Will we see an element of Dodd-Frank change out of this hearing?
Well, I've worked against Dodd-Frank. I would vote to repeal it now. It's got a lot of bad stuff in it. A lot of the Democrats are going to say, oh, if we'd had Dodd-Frank in place, we'd had the Volcker in place, this wouldn't happen. That's nonsense.
Well, I'm actually curious about that, though. Given that you voted against Glass-Steagall the first time around.
That's right.
Why are you against the Volcker rule now?
Well, I didn't say I was against the Volcker rule. I said that they haven't defined the Volcker rule. The regulators hadn't defined the Volcker rule. The Volcker rule is not in place. Let's see what they come up with. I do agree with one thing. There can't be a substitute for too much capital.
Too big to fail. You think it still exists?
I think that the Dodd-Frank legislation has basically enshrined the too big to fail. Talking about picking out firms that are subject to systemic risk.
I don't know if you saw, there was a piece in the Financial Times this morning talking about if J.P. Morgan were to fail, or were to have a $50 billion loss, what the run would look like, what would ultimately happen. And the argument in the article was that actually the system would be fine. Do you buy that?
Well, according to what the regulator said last week, they could lose $80 billion and still be standing under the stress test.
Right. Jamie Dimon has been hailed as one of the great risk managers in the system. How does this change your view at all, if it does at all, of him?
Well, I think the record speaks for itself. Jamie Dimon has been a good banker. I'm not here to defend him or accuse him of anything. I think the record will speak for itself. But like everybody makes mistakes, but that's a huge organization. The question is, did he have in place system to know what was really going on?
Right. Final question, disclosure. Do you think, from what you've seen thus far, that the disclosure at J.P. Morgan has been appropriate? Famously, the tempest in a teapot comment on April 13th. Then on May 10th, they came out with this $2 billion loss, which may have morphed to a $4 or $5 billion loss. We don't know. Your views?
Well, if you have 1,000 cuts, you know, you can still go. If you have one cut and that's it, and that's what they thought to begin with, I don't think they've had 1,000 cuts, but they've had more than one. They have to work it. It's crisis management.
Okay. Senator Shelby, thank you for joining us this morning. Appreciate it very much. Joe?
Hey, Andrew, thank you very much. You know, we're going to be watching those